The cold was a living thing. It sank its teeth into the worn wool of her tunic and gnawed at the flesh beneath. Ilara's fingers were numb, clumsy sticks of ice as she scrubbed the flagstones of the great hall. Each dip into the bucket of frigid water was a fresh agony, a sharp, biting pain that shot up her arms and settled deep in her bones. They called her the Ghost of Silvermoon, an Omega orphan, a shadow clinging to the edges of the pack, visible only when there was a mess to clean or a burden to carry. She had learned long ago that worthlessness was a kind of invisibility cloak, one that protected her from notice but suffocated her all the same. A sharp kick to her ribs sent her sprawling, the bucket tipping and a wave of dirty, icy water washing over her. "Clumsy wretch," Lyra sneered, her voice as sharp and cold as the winter wind rattling the shutters. She stood over Ilara, a vision of warmth and privilege in her fur-lined cloak, her lips curled in disgust. "Look at this mess. Now you'll have to do it all over again." Pain flared, hot and sharp, but Ilara bit down on her lip to keep the cry inside. Showing pain was a weakness, and weakness was an invitation for more cruelty. She pushed herself up, her thin frame trembling from the impact and the sudden, shocking cold of the water soaking through her clothes. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words barely audible, tasting of blood and shame. Lyra laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Sorry won't make the floor clean, will it? The Alpha King's envoys arrive in 2 days. This hall must be pristine. Do it right this time, or you'll be sleeping in the snow." The threat was not an idle one. She had been forced to sleep outside before, huddled against the leeward side of the kitchens for what little warmth seeped through the stones. Ilara simply nodded, her eyes fixed on the spreading puddle. She didn't look at Lyra. She didn't look at the other pack members who watched with amusement or indifference. To meet their eyes was to acknowledge her place at the bottom of their world, a truth she already felt in every aching muscle and every shiver that racked her body. She gritted her teeth, the motion a small, silent act of defiance. They could break her body, but there was a tiny, stubborn spark deep inside her that refused to be extinguished. It was a pathetic little flame, flickering and weak, but it was hers. It was all she had. She reached for her rag, her raw fingers protesting as she plunged them back into the remaining water in the bucket. The cold was a punishment, a constant reminder of her status. She was nothing, a stray taken in out of some long-forgotten pity, now tolerated only for her usefulness. As she worked, the great doors of the hall blew open, letting in a furious blast of wind and snow. The storm that had been threatening for days had finally arrived. It howled like a great beast, a primal scream of winter's fury. Lyra shuddered theatrically, pulling her furs tighter. Then a malicious glint entered her eyes. She looked down at Ilara, a cruel smile playing on her lips. "Actually, I have a task for you," she said, her tone deceptively sweet. "I have a terrible headache. The healer says only fresh frost fern root will help." Ilara's head snapped up. Frost fern grew only at the base of the Whisperwood, on the other side of the river. In this blizzard, it was a death sentence. "But the storm," Ilara stammered, her voice trembling. Lyra's smile widened. "Are you refusing a request from a superior? Perhaps the Alpha would be interested to hear of your insubordination." She leaned down, her voice dropping to a vicious whisper. "Go, or I'll make sure you never feel warm again." There was no choice. There was never a choice. Nodding numbly, Ilara rose to her feet, her soaked clothes clinging to her like a second skin of ice. She didn't have a cloak, only her threadbare tunic and leggings. She knew what this was. It was a dismissal. A creative way to be rid of the pack's ghost. She walked out of the hall without another word, the laughter of Lyra and her friends following her like a physical blow. The wind hit her with the force of a battering ram, stealing the air from her lungs and driving needles of snow into her skin. The world outside was a churning vortex of white. The path was already gone, buried under a rapidly growing shroud of snow. Every step was a struggle, her frozen feet sinking deep into the drifts. The cold was no longer just a pain. It was a predator, stalking her, draining the last of her strength. What was happening to her? Was this how it ended? A frozen, forgotten corpse in a blizzard, all because of Lyra's headache? The injustice of it was a bitter pill in her throat. She pushed onward, driven by that stubborn, flickering spark. She would not give Lyra the satisfaction. She would find the fern. She would survive. It was a foolish, desperate hope, but it was enough to make her put one foot in front of the other. The forest was a maze of skeletal trees and howling wind. Snow blinded her, and the cold had leached all feeling from her extremities. She was stumbling now, her vision blurring at the edges. Disorientation set in. She had no idea where she was. She fell. The impact was surprisingly soft, a cushioned descent into a deep drift. For a moment she lay there, the snow a strangely comforting blanket. It would be so easy to close her eyes, to let the cold sing her its final lullaby. So easy to just stop. No. With a groan, she forced herself to move, to crawl, to fight. Her hand brushed against something that wasn't snow or frozen earth. It was stone, and it was warm. Warm? Confusion cut through the fog of cold. She pushed the snow away, her numb fingers clumsy. She uncovered a low wall of dark, moss-covered stone, radiating a gentle, impossible heat. Following it, she found an archway, veiled by a shimmering curtain of what looked like heat haze, holding the blizzard at bay. Hesitantly, she pushed through it. The change was instantaneous and dizzying. The roar of the wind vanished, replaced by a profound, reverent silence. The biting cold was gone, replaced by the soft, humid air of a summer evening. She stood in a place that should not exist. A hidden garden, nestled in the heart of winter's fury. Lush, green grass carpeted the ground, and strange, luminous flowers bloomed in vibrant hues, their petals dusted with melting snowflakes. A gentle stream, steaming in the cool air, wound its way through the sanctuary. The air smelled of damp earth, night-blooming jasmine, and something else, something wild and ancient, and blood. Her eyes, adjusting to the soft glow of the flowers, fell upon a shape at the center of the garden. A great black wolf, larger than any she had ever seen, lay sprawled on the mossy ground. Its fur was the color of a starless midnight, matted with snow and dark, glistening blood. A deep, ugly gash ran along its flank, and its breathing was a shallow, ragged affair. Fear, sharp and primal, lanced through her. This was a predator, a monster from the old tales. Her instinct screamed at her to run, to flee back into the storm where at least the death was a familiar one. But she didn't move. She saw the pain in the faint tremor of its massive body. She saw the vulnerability in its labored breaths. It was a creature of immense power, brought low, and in its suffering, she saw a reflection of her own. She knew what it was to be hurt, to be alone, to be dying. That small, stubborn spark inside her flickered, then burned a little brighter. She was worthless, a ghost, a nobody. But maybe, just for a moment, she could be something else. Slowly, cautiously, she took a step forward, then another. The wolf didn't stir, its life bleeding out onto the sacred ground. She knelt beside it, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The scent of its blood was thick, coppery and stark against the sweetness of the flowers. She reached out a trembling hand, her mind screaming at her folly. What could she possibly do? She was no healer. She had nothing. Her fingers, still raw and red from the scrubbing bucket, hovered over the ragged wound. An inexplicable pull, a deep, resonant hum, seemed to emanate from the creature, calling to something buried deep within her. It was a feeling of homecoming, of recognition, of a song she had forgotten she knew. She had to touch it. She had to. She pressed her palm against the hot, sticky fur just beside the gash. The world exploded. A torrent of pure, white-hot energy erupted from the point of contact, not from the wolf, but from her. It surged through her arm, a wildfire in her veins, blindingly bright and overwhelmingly powerful. A scream was torn from her throat as a searing pain erupted on the back of her hand, as if she had been branded with a hot iron. The wolf's body convulsed under her touch, a deep, guttural cry rumbling in its chest. Its eyes, which had been closed, snapped open. They were not the eyes of an animal. They were the color of molten gold, intelligent, ancient, and blazing with a terrifying intensity, and they were fixed on her. The light receded as quickly as it had come, leaving shimmering after-images dancing in her vision. Her arm throbbed, and the spot on her hand burned with a fierce, clean heat. She looked down. Etched onto her skin, glowing with a soft, silvery light, was an intricate mark. It was a swirling pattern of vines and thorns, delicate and deadly, wrapping around a single, perfect star. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. What was happening to me? The wolf stared at her, its golden eyes wide with a look of stunned, absolute recognition. The ragged breathing had evened out. The trembling had ceased. She glanced at the wound. It was closing before her very eyes, the torn flesh knitting itself back together, leaving behind only smooth, unblemished skin beneath the blood-matted fur. Her touch had healed it. Her, a worthless omega. The sheer impossibility of it sent her reeling backward, scrambling away from the massive creature. Her mind was a maelstrom of fear and confusion. Magic. This was magic. The kind whispered about in fearful tones, the kind that got people exiled or executed. But the wolf, the man, was changing. Bones cracked and reformed with sickening speed. Fur receded into skin. The massive form reshaped itself, elongating, solidifying into something impossibly, terrifyingly human. He rose to his feet in a single, fluid motion. He was colossal, a giant carved from mountain stone and moonlight. Broad shoulders tapered to a narrow waist, every inch of him corded with lean, powerful muscle. His hair was as black as his wolf's pelt, falling in wild strands around a face that was harsh, beautiful, and utterly predatory. And he was completely naked, his body gleaming in the soft light of the glowing flora. Elara could not breathe. She could not move. She was trapped in the inferno of his gaze, those molten gold eyes that saw not a ghost, not a worthless servant, but something else entirely, something he had been looking for. He took a step toward her, his movements filled with a grace that belied his size. The ground seemed to tremble beneath his feet. He stopped just before her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. He smelled of pine, of winter storms, and of the ancient earth in this impossible garden. He slowly raised a hand, his fingers long and calloused, and gently, so gently, brushed a stray, snow-dampened strand of hair from her cheek. The touch was electric, sending a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cold. His voice, when he finally spoke, was deep as thunder and soft as velvet. It resonated not just in her ears, but in her very soul, a vibration that settled in her bones and echoed the hum she had felt before. Mine. The word was not a question, it was a statement, a declaration, a claim. Elara's world tilted on its axis. Her body, her very instincts, sang in response to that single word. A feeling of safety, of belonging, washed over her, so potent and overwhelming it nearly brought her to her knees. It was a desperate, primal craving she had never known she possessed. But her mind, conditioned by years of abuse and self-loathing, screamed in terror. This was a trap, a trick. No one claimed the worthless. No one wanted the ghost. He was some powerful, dangerous being, and she was a mouse before a lion. Who are you?" she whispered, her voice frail. His golden eyes softened, a flicker of something ancient and lonely in their depths. "I am Kale," he said. He looked at the glowing mark on her hand, then back to her face. "And you are her, the one I have waited for." He saw the fear warring with confusion in her eyes. He saw her trembling. He shrugged off the massive fur cloak that had materialized on his shoulders as he shifted and draped it around her. It was heavy, warm, and smelled intoxicatingly of him. It swallowed her small frame, a cocoon of impossible safety. "You are cold," he stated simply. "Come." He turned and led her toward a fissure in the rock face at the back of the garden, one she hadn't noticed before. It opened into a dark cave. He held her hand, his large, warm fingers wrapping completely around hers. The contact sent another jolt through her. But this time, it was not painful. It was a current of pure warmth, of connection. The cave was not as dark as it first appeared. Glowing crystals were embedded in the walls, casting a soft, blue light over a surprisingly comfortable living space. There was a bed of thick furs, a stone hearth where a fire now crackled to life with a flick of his wrist, and a small table. He guided her to a simple wooden chair by the fire. "Sit down." It was a command, but it was spoken with a gentleness that disarmed her. She sank into the chair, the heavy cloak pooling around her. The warmth from the fire began to seep into her chilled bones, a luxury she hadn't felt in years. He knelt before her, his golden eyes level with hers. He took her hand, the one with the mark, and examined it with a reverence that made her breath catch. "I was ambushed," he explained, his voice a low rumble. "Followers of the Ember Covenant. They used a poisoned blade. I would have died had you not found me." He looked up at her, his expression intense. "Your touch. It burned the poison out. It healed me. What is your name?" "Ilara," she breathed. "Ilara," he repeated, the name a sacred thing on his tongue. "I have searched for centuries. I had begun to believe the fates were cruel, that my other half had never been born." Her mind struggled to grasp his words. Other half? Fated mate? These were concepts from legends, tales told to pack pups. They weren't real. They couldn't be happening to her. "I don't understand," she said, her voice shaking. I'm nobody. An Omega. I have no magic." Kale's smile was like the first sunrise after a long winter. It was slow, breathtaking, and filled with a warmth that touched the coldest parts of her heart. "You are not nobody, Ilara. You are the other half of my soul. And you possess a magic so rare, so pure, it has not been seen in this world for 1,000 years. You are a light bringer, a soul healer." Hope, a terrifying and fragile thing, began to bloom in her chest. Could it be true? Could she be more than the ghost they all called her? Meanwhile, back in the Silvermoon pack hall, Lyra was growing uneasy. The blizzard had become a true monster, and even her cruelty had its limits when it came to drawing the Alpha's ire. If the Omega girl was found frozen to death because of her petty command, there would be questions. "Torvin!" she called to a broad-shouldered warrior who had long tried to win her favor. "Take a few men. Make a show of looking for the stray. You won't find her in this, but at least we can say we tried." Torvin nodded, but his eyes were sharp and calculating. He had no interest in Lyra or the frozen Omega. But he served another master, one who paid in power, not fleeting smiles. Lord Malachor, leader of the Ember Covenant, had promised him a place of honor when the old world was burned away. While the other warriors made a great show of searching near the pack house, Torvin broke away. His senses were sharper, honed by dark rituals. He caught a strange scent on the wind, not of blood or fear, but of impossible summer flowers and a spike of raw, untamed magic. He followed it, his heart pounding with a predator's excitement. The trail led him to the edge of the Whisperwood and to the hidden sanctuary. Shielded by the swirling snow, he peered through the shimmering barrier. His eyes widened. He saw the Alpha King, Kale, the one his master sought to destroy. and with him was the Omega girl, Ilara. She was wrapped in Kale's own cloak, sitting by a fire. But it was the back of her hand that made Torvin's breath catch in his throat. Even from this distance, he could see the faint, silvery glow of the claiming mark, the soul bond. The legends were true. A cruel, triumphant smile spread across Torvin's face. Lord Malachor had been searching for a weakness in the Alpha King for decades, a way to break his spirit, to sever his connection to the ancestral magic of the land. And here she was, not a person, but a key, a weapon. He slipped back into the storm, his mind racing. He had to get this information to his master. The game had just changed. The Alpha King had found his fated mate, and in doing so, he had just handed his greatest enemy the dagger to plunge into his heart. Inside the cave, Kale felt a flicker of unease, a shift in the wind that his instincts warned him of. He had to deal with the remnants of the ambush party. He had to secure his territory. He rose to his feet, his expression grim. "I must leave," he said, his voice tight with reluctance. "There are enemies nearby, but I will not be long." Ilara's fragile hope faltered. Panic seized her. "Don't go," she pleaded, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "Please." He knelt before her again, cupping her face in his large hands. His thumbs stroked her cheeks, a gesture of profound tenderness. "I will return for you, Ilara. Nothing in this world or any other could keep me from you. Stay here. You are safe in this sanctuary. No one can enter without my will." He leaned in and pressed his lips to her forehead. The kiss was not one of passion, but of sealing a promise. It was a brand of ownership and protection, and it sent a wave of warmth through her entire being. "I have you," he murmured against her skin. And then he was gone, melting into the shadows at the cave's entrance, leaving her alone with the crackling fire and the heavy weight of his cloak. For the first time in her life, she felt a flicker of what it might be like to be wanted, to be cherished. The hope was so bright, it was painful. Hours passed. Ilara drifted into an exhausted sleep by the fire, the most peaceful rest she had ever known. She dreamt of golden eyes and a voice that called her mine. She was woken by a sudden, violent crash. The shimmering barrier at the entrance to the garden had been torn asunder. The blizzard roared back in, a wave of icy fury extinguishing the garden's warmth. The luminous flowers withered and died in an instant, their light snuffed out. Shadowy figures poured into the sanctuary, their forms indistinct in the swirling snow. At their lead was Torvin, his face twisted in a triumphant sneer. "There she is," he snarled, "the Alpha King's little pet." Fear, cold and familiar, flooded Ilara's veins. She scrambled to her feet, clutching Kale's cloak around her like a shield. "Who are you? What do you want?" Torvin laughed. "Lord Malachor sends his regards, and his thanks. You're going to be very useful." Before she could scream, they were on her. Strong hands grabbed her, tearing the cloak from her shoulders. One of them clamped a hand over her mouth. They bound her wrists with chains of cold-forged iron. The moment the metal touched her skin, the warm, vibrant connection she felt to Kale was severed. It was a physical tearing in her soul, an agony so profound it stole her breath. A scream of pure anguish ripped through her, muffled by the hand over her mouth. The world went gray. The colors bleached out, the life draining away. The pain was unbearable. A hollow, aching void where that beautiful, resonant hum had been. She was dragged from the cave, out of the dying garden and into the full fury of the blizzard. The cold was 1,000 times worse now, an active, malevolent force that sought to freeze the very marrow in her bones. She struggled, but she was weak, and the iron chains seemed to sap her will. They took her to a place of nightmares. A fortress of black stone that seemed to absorb the light, perched on a jagged mountain peak. It was cold, damp, and smelled of despair and old blood. She was thrown into a lightless cell, the iron chains secured to a ring in the wall. The bond was a gaping wound inside her. She could feel Kale's frantic panic and rage as a distant, distorted echo, but the connection was too damaged, too weak. He knew she was taken, but he didn't know where. The door to her cell creaked open, spilling a sliver of sickly green torchlight into the darkness. A tall, gaunt figure stood silhouetted in the doorway. He was clad in black armor etched with red symbols that seemed to writhe in the light. His face was pale and aristocratic, but his eyes glowed with a faint, embers-like light. This was Lord Malachor. He entered the cell, his presence sucking the last vestiges of warmth from the air. He looked down at her, his expression a mixture of contempt and clinical interest. "So this is it," he mused, his voice a dry rustle of dead leaves. "The great Alpha King's fated mate. I must admit I am underwhelmed. You are nothing, a scrawny, terrified little thing." He crouched down, forcing her to meet his gaze. "Do you know why you are here, little Omega? You are the key. Kale's power is tied to the life of this land, an ancient ancestral bond. A soul bond, like the one you now share with him, is a direct conduit to that power, a vulnerability he has not had for 500 years. He smiled, a chilling, bloodless expression. "I am going to use you. On the night of the twin moons, I will perform a ritual. I will pour my shadow magic into your bond. It will travel along that connection and poison his soul, severing him from his power source forever. He will be rendered weak, mortal, and I will take his throne." He reached out and traced the glowing mark on her hand with a cold finger. "You will be the instrument of his destruction, and when you have served your purpose, you will die." His words were hammer blows, shattering the last of her fragile hope. Worthless, an instrument, a vessel to be used and discarded. It was everything she had ever been told she was. Lyra, the pack, they were right all along. Kale had been wrong. He had seen something in her that wasn't there. Despair, absolute and soul-crushing, washed over her. She slumped against the wall, the fight draining out of her. Malachor was right. She was nothing. Days blurred into a haze of cold and misery. She was given stale bread and brackish water, just enough to keep her alive. The bond remained a source of constant, agonizing pain, a reminder of the warmth and safety she had felt for just a few fleeting hours. She was at her lowest point, huddled in the darkness, believing her fate was sealed. She was going to die, and worse, she was going to be the cause of Kale's downfall. The man who had looked at her like she was a sunrise. Tears streamed down her face, freezing on her cheeks. She was so sorry, so sorry. And then, a flicker. Deep within the aching void of the severed bond, a tiny spark of warmth ignited. It was faint, a single candle in a hurricane, but it was there. Ilara. The voice was not in her ears, but in her soul. It was his. Kale. She gasped, her head shooting up. Was she imagining it? Hold on. The voice was stronger now, a thread of steel in the darkness. It was filled with a desperate, furious love. "I feel you. They cannot hide you from me forever. I am coming." The spark of warmth grew, pushing back against the encroaching despair. He hadn't given up. He was fighting for her. He still believed in her. A new feeling began to smolder in the pit of her stomach, displacing the cold fear. It was anger. A slow-burning rage against Malachor, against Torvin, against Lyra, and everyone who had ever called her worthless. They would not use her. They would not break him. The night of the twin moons arrived. 2 pale discs hung in the sky, bathing the black fortress in an eerie, silver light. Guards dragged Ilara from her cell and took her to the highest tower, open to the freezing sky. An altar of obsidian stood at the center of a complex circle of runes, which pulsed with a malevolent red energy. Malachor stood waiting, his followers, the Ember Covenant, chanting in a guttural language around him. Ilara was forced onto the altar, her arms and legs chained to the cold stone. She looked up at the sky, at the vast, indifferent moons, and she thought of Kael. She held on to the memory of his voice, the feeling of his promise. Hold on. "Let the ritual commence," Malachor boomed, raising a jagged, ceremonial dagger. He began the incantation, his voice weaving a tapestry of dark power. The runes on the floor blazed brighter, the air crackling with energy that felt foul and corrupt. A searing pain shot through the mark on her hand as he began to channel his power into it. The bond screamed, a feeling of violation and poison flooding through it. She could feel Kael's agony, a distant echo of her own. Just as her hope began to fade, just as the darkness threatened to consume everything, the world exploded for the second time. Boom! The entire outer wall of the tower blasted inward, stone and shadow erupting in a shower of debris. Through the dust and chaos, a figure of pure, untamed fury emerged. Kael. His eyes were not gold, but blazing silver, incandescent with rage. He was in his half-shifted form, claws extending from his fingertips, his teeth elongated into fangs. Behind him were his royal guard, a silent, deadly force of nature that fell upon the Ember Covenant cultists like wolves on sheep. A massive battle erupted. The clang of steel, the snarls of shifted warriors, and the screams of the dying filled the air. But Kael had eyes only for the altar, for her. "Elara!" he roared, his voice shaking the very stones. He fought his way toward her, a whirlwind of destruction. But Malachor stepped into his path, his own shadow-wreathed sword in hand. "You are too late, old king," Malachor hissed. "The bond is already poisoned. She has already destroyed you." "You will not touch her again," Kael snarled, and they clashed. It was a battle of titans, light and shadow, life and decay. Kael was stronger, fueled by a righteous fury, but Malachor was cunning, using dark magic to parry and strike. Elara could only watch, helpless, as the two ancient powers fought over her fate. Kael gained the upper hand, disarming Malachor and driving him to his knees. He raised his claws for the final blow. But Malachor laughed, a gurgling, triumphant sound. "You care for her," he spat, and with a final surge of power he lunged, not at Kael, but at the altar. He drove his poisoned dagger deep into Kael's side as the Alpha King twisted to intercept the blow meant for Elara. Kael cried out, a sound of shock and pain, and fell to one knee, clutching his side. Black veins spread from the wound, the Covenant's poison potent and fast-acting. Seeing him fall, seeing the man who had called her mine, wounded and in danger because of her, something inside Elara finally shattered. The years of pain, the humiliation, the cold, the despair, the terror, and the fierce, brilliant, possessive love she now realized she felt for this man, it all coalesced into a single, incandescent point of pressure inside her. And it erupted. A blinding, silent wave of pure, white-hot light exploded from her body. It was not fire, it was not destructive. It was the essence of life itself, of starlight and creation. It pulsed outward, a shockwave of absolute purity. The lesser shadow creatures of the Covenant evaporated into dust where they stood. The chanting stopped abruptly. The red runes on the floor were scoured clean, leaving only bare stone. Malachor was thrown back as if by a physical blow, screaming as the pure light touched his skin, burning him like acid. The light washed over Kael, and the black veins of poison receded and vanished. His wound closed, leaving not even a scar. He looked up, his silver eyes wide with awe, as Elara, the source of it all, began to glow. With a surge of newfound strength she didn't understand, she flexed her arms, and the cold-forged iron chains shattered into pieces. She stood up from the altar, her body radiating a soft, silver luminescence, her eyes matching Kael's. The fear was gone, replaced by a calm, lethal rage. She turned to face Malachor, who was staggering to his feet, his face blistered and burned. "You are nothing!" he shrieked, his voice filled with disbelief and hatred. "An Omega stray, a worthless gutter rat." Elara took a step forward. Her voice, when she spoke, was not a whisper. It was clear, powerful, and it rang with an authority that was utterly her own. "I am his," she declared, her glowing eyes locking onto Malakor's. "And he is mine." She raised a hand, and a beam of silver light shot forth, pinning him against the ruined wall. "You will not touch him again." Chaol rose to his feet, his own power fully restored, his eyes glowing gold once more, filled with a fierce pride and an overwhelming love for the magnificent, powerful woman before him. He walked to stand beside her, a united front of light and righteous shadow. He placed a hand on her shoulder, and together they faced their enemy. With a final, shared glance, Chaol lunged forward and delivered the final, fatal blow. Silence fell upon the tower, broken only by the whistling of the wind through the shattered wall. The battle was over. The Ember Covenant was broken. Chaol turned to Elara, his expression soft, his rage gone. The glow around her faded, leaving her standing there, trembling slightly from the aftermath of the power that had surged through her. He didn't hesitate. He closed the distance between them in 2 long strides and pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly against his chest as if he would never let go. She buried her face in his tunic, inhaling his scent, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart. He pulled back just enough to cup her face in his hands, his thumbs gently stroking her skin. His golden eyes were filled with so much emotion it made her heart ache. Awe, relief, and a love so profound it was humbling. "You saved me," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Your light. Elara, it was the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." "I thought I'd lost you," she choked out, tears finally breaking free. "He said I was nothing, that I was just a tool to destroy you." "Never," Chaol said fiercely, his gaze intense. "You are not nothing. You are everything. Not because of this power, but because you are you. You are my heart, my soul, my queen." She looked at him, truly looked at the love and adoration in his face, and for the first time, she believed it. The label of worthless that had been branded on her soul for so long finally began to fade. She reached up and touched the silvery mark on her hand, the mark that had caused so much pain, but had also led her to him. Then, with a newfound confidence, she placed that hand flat against his chest, over his heart. "Mine," she whispered, echoing his own first word to her. It was not a question. It was a declaration, a claim. The bond between them flared, a surge of warmth and light. Through the fabric of his tunic, a glow appeared. He pulled the torn cloth aside, and there, etched over his heart, was the masculine counterpart to her mark, a sunburst of golden thorns and vines, a perfect match. The bond was complete, no longer a one-way claim, but a shared connection, equal and absolute. They returned to his capital, a city of gleaming silver spires nestled in a vast, verdant valley. The news of their victory, and of the king's found mate, had preceded them. The entire city had gathered in the main square before the palace. Chaol led her to the grand balcony, his hand holding hers tightly. He stood before his people, his royal guard arrayed behind them, and his voice boomed across the square, amplified by magic. "People of the Northern Kingdom," he announced. "For centuries I have led you alone. Today, that changes." He drew Elara forward to stand beside him. She tensed, the old fear of being seen, of being judged, rising in her. He squeezed her hand reassuringly. "This is Elara, my fated mate, my soul's other half. The Ember Covenant sought to use her to destroy me. Instead, her light saved us all. She is not just my mate, she is your Luna Queen." A moment of stunned silence, and then the square erupted in a deafening roar of approval. The cheers washed over Elara, not with the weight of expectation, but with the warmth of acceptance. They were not cheering for a nameless Omega. They were cheering for her, for their queen. Later, after the former Alpha of Silvermoon and a humiliated Lyra had been brought before them to answer for their crimes, Elara stood on that same balcony, looking out at the city lights under a starry sky. The air was cool, but the cold no longer bothered her. Strong arms wrapped around her from behind, and Kale pulled her back against his solid chest. He rested his chin on her shoulder, his warmth a comforting blanket. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured into her hair. She leaned back into his embrace, a soft, genuine smile gracing her lips for the first time she could remember. The little flickering spark inside her was no longer struggling to survive in the dark. It was a bonfire, bright and warm and strong. "I'm thinking," she said, her voice filled with a quiet, certain joy, "that I'm finally home."